In the morning, growers. Welcome to today's News and Guidance Special Report. Coming at you from the Book Club's Ranch Retreat. Let's get started.
Let's get right into it.
Yeah, so imagine for a second that you are sitting at your kitchen table, a quill in hand, and you are casually drafting a political manifesto that will literally alter the course of human history. And human rights, for that matter.
Right, just a casual Tuesday.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you are only doing this because you just finished scraping up enough raw organic waste to manufacture military-grade high explosives right in your backyard.
Which is just wild to even picture.
It is wild. And all of this is happening while a deadly plague is literally sweeping through the houses just a few doors down from yours. I mean, that is the exact scenario we are stepping into today. I'm Fidges to Fis, and I am the kind of person who geeks out over how big historical moments usually happen in the messy, kind of chaotic margins of everyday life, and I am so ready to pull this apart with you all.
And I'm madder. I spent a lot of my time trying to connect those messy, microscopic details to the massive, overarching patterns of human behavior and philosophy. And we really have the perfect document for that kind of synthesis today.
We really, really do. Because for this deep dive, we are zeroing in on a single extraordinary piece of source material. It is a letter written by Abigail Adams to John Adams.
A single letter.
Yeah, just one letter. It spans just a few days, from March 31st to April 5th, 1776. And it comes to us courtesy of the Adams Papers digital edition at the Massachusetts Historical Society.
It's an incredible resource.
It really is. So our mission for you today is to explore how this one solitary piece of correspondence, literally just a few fragile sheets of paper, serves as a complete, concentrated microcosm of an entire world in absolute upheaval.
It is a staggering piece of writing, honestly. When you look at the sheer density of the topics she covers in a letter that spans just a handful of days, it requires us to, completely rethink our assumptions about the home front.
Right, because the home front wasn't just sitting around knitting.
Exactly. It bounces wildly between mundane marital exasperation, high-level geopolitical military strategy, the hyper-local management of real estate in a literal war zone, groundbreaking feminist political philosophy, the sudden tragic outbreak of disease, and, as you mentioned, the literal synthesis of chemical munitions.
It is the ultimate snapshot of 1776, but stripped of all the marble statue mythology. We're taking you directly into the mind of someone living through the daily grinding whiplash of revolution. So, okay, let's unpack this, because we need to start right at the opening lines of the March 31st entry, which was written from Braintree, Massachusetts.
Let's do it.
It opens with what feels like a highly relatable, almost timeless domestic complaint, and then it just hard pivots into macro strategy. So she writes, "I wish you would ever write me a letter half as long as I write you, and tell me, if you may, where your fleet are gone. What sort of defense Virginia can make against our common enemy."
The whiplash is immediate there.
So immediate.
And she notes later in the letter that his last letter to her was dated March 8th. So she has been waiting weeks. She is carrying the entire mental, physical, and logistical load of their estate, their family, and the local war effort in Massachusetts. And he is apparently giving her very short, infrequent, perhaps overly cautious updates from the Continental Congress.
I have to admit, I read that first line and thought, wow, this is the colonial equivalent of "you never text me back."
It really is.
But wait, I want to push back on this a little bit. Because is she just venting? Or is there a strategic reason she is bringing up his lack of communication?
Yeah.
She immediately demands intelligence. "Tell me, if you may, where your fleets are gone." It doesn't sound like she's just missing her husband's romantic poetry. It sounds like a commanding officer asking a subordinate for a sitrep.
What's fascinating here is that you are entirely right to read it that way. The physical reality of correspondence in the 18th century was agonizingly slow and inherently risky. Letters could be intercepted,
Right, the British could just grab the mailbag.
Exactly. Information was currency. When she says, "tell me if you may," she's acknowledging the secrecy of the Continental Congress, but she is also firmly asserting her right to be in the intelligence loop. She views herself as an active participant in this conflict, and that is why she immediately moves from the movement of the fleet to a deep sociological analysis of Virginia.
Right. She asks what sort of defense Virginia can make against the common enemy. But she isn't asking about their supply of muskets or, the thickness of their fortress walls. She goes straight for the throat regarding their social hierarchy.
She does.
She asks, "Are not the gentry lords and the common people vassals? Are they not like the uncivilized natives Britain represents us to be?" Can you explain the mechanics of what she's doing here rhetorically? Because she is using some incredibly loaded terminology for her own supposed allies.
She is engaging in a brilliant and devastating rhetorical inversion. To understand the mechanism of her argument, you have to look at the specific words she uses: gentry, lords, and vassals.
Right, vassals, that's a heavy word.
It is. A vassal is a person who has entered into a mutual obligation to a lord or monarch, usually in the context of the feudal system. It implies a state of subjugation, a lack of individual liberty, where one's labor and loyalty are extracted by a superior class. By categorizing the common people of Virginia as vassals, she is arguing that the southern colonies are operating under an antiquated, oppressive European social structure.
Which completely undermines the whole we are fighting for freedom narrative that they're trying to push.
Exactly. And then she twists the knife using the British propaganda. The British Empire was framing the rebellious colonists as uncivilized natives, painting them as savage and lawless to justify putting down the rebellion by force.
So they were already being smeared in the press, basically.
Yeah, and she takes that British insult and redirects it at the Virginia gentry. She essentially says, the British are wrong about us up here in New England, but look at the Virginia elite, hoarding power, enforcing a rigid class system, treating their own populace like serfs. They are the ones behaving like the very caricature of unprincipled savages the British claim we all are.
I am still trying to wrap my head around how sharp this is. I mean, she is hundreds of miles away, but her geopolitical intelligence network is functioning like a decentralized supply chain node. She's absorbing data about troop movements and cultural shifts and synthesizing it into this massive critique.
It's remarkable synthesis.
It is. She mentions seeing the riflemen from the South, and noting that they seem savage and bloodthirsty, praying they aren't a true representation of the whole population down there. And then she delivers what I think is the most devastating blow of the whole section.
The critique of slavery.
Yes, absolutely. She writes, I have sometimes been ready to think that the passion for liberty cannot be equally strong in the breasts of those who have been accustomed to deprive their fellow creatures of theirs. It is just absolute, undeniable logic.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, she is exposing the foundational hypocrisy of the American Revolution as it applied to the enslavers. The mechanical flaw in their philosophy is glaring. You cannot intellectually demand natural rights and liberty from a king, while simultaneously denying natural rights and liberty to humans you hold in bondage.
Right, it just doesn't compute.
But she doesn't just rest her argument on Enlightenment political theory, you know. She drills down into the core ethical mechanism of their shared society, which is Christianity.
Right, she brings up the golden rule. She says, of this I am certain that it is not founded upon that generous and Christian principle of doing to others as we would that others should do unto us.
The golden rule operates as an inescapable moral algorithm. It is the baseline test for ethical consistency. By invoking it, she strips away all the complex political justifications for slavery and reduces it to a simple, unanswerable equation.
Do unto others.
Yes. If you do not want to be enslaved by Britain, how can you enslave others? Therefore, the Virginia gentry's passion for liberty cannot be strong. It is merely a passion for their own continued dominance.
I want to pause and just appreciate how incredibly well-informed she is here. She isn't just speaking in abstract terms. She specifically calls out key figures. She says that the colony of Virginia produced a Washington part, obviously giving them immense credit for George Washington, but then says they were shamefully duped by a Dunmore.
Right, Lord Dunmore.
Yeah, and for those of you listening who might not have the historical roster memorized, Lord Dunmore was the royal governor of Virginia who famously offered freedom to enslaved people if they took up arms against the rebelling colonists.
And that detail highlights why she views this common enemy not just as a military force, but as a philosophical threat. The hypocrisy she identifies isn't just a moral failing, it is a critical strategic vulnerability.
Because Dunmore could just use it against them.
Precisely. Dunmore was able to exploit the cruelty of the enslavers to build his own forces. She's analyzing the war through a lens where moral philosophy and military strategy are hopelessly intertwined. They aren't separate things for her.
But just as you, as the reader, are settling into this grand, soaring debate about the nature of human liberty and the hypocrisy of the Southern gentry, the letter takes you by the collar and throws you right back into the mud. We go from the macro-level geopolitical landscape, zooming straight down to the hyper-local, the fate of the Adams property in Boston following the end of the siege.
The transition is jarring, I'll admit, but it perfectly illustrates the dual reality she occupies. The grand stage of the revolution instantly gives way to the immediate pragmatic reality of being a property owner in a war zone.
Yeah, from philosophy to property management.
The British forces have fled Boston in what she describes as a precipitate flight, basically a hasty, panicked evacuation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because you would think her first instinct would be to rush into the city to check on her house, right? Like, the enemy is gone, let's go see the damage. But she can't. She writes to John, "Do not you want to see Boston? I am fearful of the smallpox, or I should have been in before this time."
The smallpox threat was massive.
It was, and I just want to underline the mechanics of this fear for you, the listener. Smallpox isn't just a bad cold. It is a highly contagious, horrifyingly lethal virus. For her, it acts as an invisible, impenetrable wall around the city. The British military might be gone, but the biological enemy has occupied the space they left behind.
That is an excellent point about the mechanics of disease in this era. Smallpox dictated human movement just as effectively as artillery. Because she is physically barred from entering the city by this biological threat, she has to rely on a proxy.
She has to send someone else in.
Right, she acts as a remote property manager, noting that she sent either Mr. Crane or Mr. Cranch. She notes he's the one who has the key to go into Boston and check on their house.
And what the agent reports back is fascinating. The house had been occupied by a regiment doctor. She notes it was left very dirty, but no other damage has been done to it. All the leftover belongings they had to abandon when the siege started are gone, swept away, but the physical structure is miraculously intact. And her reaction to this news, I have to admit, I struggle to understand it.
How so? What part of her reaction do you mean?
Well, she writes, "I look upon it a new acquisition of property, a property which 1 month ago I did not value at a single shilling, and could with pleasure have seen it in flames." I mean, I want to challenge this a bit. Is that normal? To just write off your own home, your own sanctuary, to the point where you would cheerfully watch it burn to the ground, and then the exact second you hear it survived, you instantly flip into landlord mode and want it cleaned out?
It is an extreme reaction, certainly.
It requires a level of psychological compartmentalization that almost sounds robotic to me.
It is an extreme psychological defense mechanism, yes, but it is deeply rational within the context of a war zone. Think about the mechanics of survival for a second. If you tie your emotional stability to a physical structure made of wood while a hostile navy is pointing cannons at it, you will lose your mind.
Okay, that makes sense. You just be in a constant state of panic.
You have to emotionally divest. By deciding the house is worth nothing, not a single shilling, and accepting its potential destruction as a necessary sacrifice for the cause, as she says, with pleasure have seen it in flames, she eliminates the enemy's ability to hold it hostage over her mental state.
Wow, that makes so much sense. She essentially bankrupted the emotional value of the house before the British could destroy the physical value.
Precisely. And when the threat suddenly vanishes and the asset is returned to her intact, she can immediately reevaluate it as a new acquisition. It is a stunning display of psychological resilience, and she extends this pragmatic assessment to the rest of the town as well. She notes that overall, Boston is left in a better state than anyone expected.
Though she doesn't give the British much credit for that. She attributes the lack of destruction mostly to their precipitate flight. They were running away too fast to bother burning things down.
Right, they just didn't have the time to set the fires.
But she does point out a really strange dichotomy in how the occupying forces behaved, which I find so curious. She says some individuals showed honor and justice. They actually left rent money for the houses they commandeered and left the furniture completely unhurt.
Which is shocking for an occupying army.
Exactly. Meanwhile, others committed what she calls abominable ravages.
And she highlights a very specific contrast to illustrate those ravages, one that is dripping with symbolic meaning. She notes that the mansion house of your president, referring to John Hancock, the president of the Continental Congress, and a primary target for the British, was left safe and its furniture unhurt.
The rebel leader's house was fine.
Yes. But the house and furniture of the Solicitor General Samuel Quincy, a loyalist who sided with the crown, was destroyed. It fell prey to his own merciless party.
The irony there is so thick you could cut it with a knife. The British and Loyalist forces completely trashed the home of one of their own top officials while leaving the mansion of the rebel ringleader pristine. But why? Is it just the chaos of war, or does she think there is a mechanism behind this behavior?
Oh, she absolutely believes there is a deeper, almost cosmic mechanism at play here. She elevates this irony into a grand philosophical observation. She writes, "Surely the very fiends feel a reverential awe for virtue and patriotism, whilst they detest the parricide and traitor."
The very fiends. I mean, she is not mincing words. She is casting the enemy as literal demons. But I want to zero in on that word, parricide. Parricide normally means the killing of a parent, right? Why is she using it to describe a loyalist whose house got trashed?
This raises an important question about how the colonists viewed their relationship to the land and to each other. In a broader classical sense, parricide can mean the killing or betrayal of one's parent country or one's own people.
No.
By labeling the loyalist Solicitor General a parricide and traitor, Abigail is arguing that turning against your own community in its fight for natural rights is a crime against nature itself. It is a violation of the foundational bonds of society.
And her theory is that even the fiends, even the occupying enemy, subconsciously recognize that violation, that they respect the patriot more than the traitor who helped them.
Exactly. She is suggesting that virtue and patriotism carry an inherent, undeniable weight. Even a hostile army feels a reverential awe for a man who stands by his principles, like Hancock, while they harbor a deep, instinctual disgust for a man who betrays his own kin, like Quincy. Therefore, they treat the traitor's property with contempt and the patriot's property with respect.
It is such a heavy, dense way to look at the world. She is navigating the macro politics of loyalty, treason, and natural law, all while literally just trying to get someone to scrub the dirt out of her living room.
It is a lot to juggle.
But finding out that the town survived and that her house wasn't burned to ashes seems to act as a catalyst for her. Because we move into the next paragraph and the tone of the letter just dramatically thaws.
It is perhaps the most beautiful and sensory passage in the entire correspondence. The physical survival of the town, combined with the shifting of the seasons, allows her to finally drop her guard for a fleeting moment. She writes, "I feel very differently at the approach of spring to what I did a month ago."
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, trying to put yourself in her shoes? Think about the physical sensations of living under siege through a New England winter. The cold, the isolation, the constant low-level hum of terror. She explains that just a month ago, they didn't know that they could safely plant or sow their crops.
Right. They couldn't plan for tomorrow.
They didn't know if they would ever reap the fruits of their industry or even be allowed to rest in their own cottages.
The existential threat was absolute and all-encompassing. The mechanics of basic human survival, food security, physical shelter, the predictability of tomorrow were entirely suspended. She notes there was a very real fear that they would be driven from the seacoast entirely to seek shelter in the untamed wilderness.
Just massive displacement. But now the siege is lifted. And she writes, "We feel as if we might sit under our own vine and eat the good of the land." That phrasing feels so specific, like she's quoting something.
She is. It is heavy biblical imagery, specifically echoing passages from Micah and 1 Kings, which talk about every man sitting under his own vine and his own fig tree in times of peace and safety. It is a powerful, culturally resonant shorthand for true ownership, security, and the absence of fear.
The relief is palpable. You can really feel it. She writes that she feels a gaieté de cœur to which she was previously a stranger. A gaiety of heart. And I love that the digital edition notes her spelling of that French phrase is very uncertain.
Yeah, she just sounded it out.
It makes the moment feel so raw and authentic. She isn't meticulously editing herself. She is just spilling this sudden, bubbling joy onto the paper. She says the sun looks brighter, the birds sing more melodiously, and nature puts on a more cheerful countenance.
It is a remarkable moment of mindfulness. After paragraphs of analyzing troop movements, societal hypocrisy, and property damage, she stops to listen to the birds. It demonstrates how intimately human psychology is tied to physical security. The end of the military siege coincides perfectly with the environmental thaw of spring.
But I have to say, this warm, fuzzy feeling doesn't make her entirely empathetic to everyone. She says they feel a temporary peace. But she acknowledges that they sympathize with those in other towns who are currently terrified that Boston's fate will become theirs. However, she then drops this incredibly harsh judgment on those terrified people.
She does. She issues a severe caveat regarding their fear.
She writes that those other towns cannot be in similar circumstances unless pusillanimity and cowardice should take possession of them. Wait, hold on. Is she being incredibly unfair here?
How do you mean?
Well, she has the luxury of her house surviving. The British are gone, the sun is shining, and now she is judging people who are completely justified in being terrified that a hostile navy is going to show up at their shores. How is that cowardice?
That is a very valid critique of her position, but to understand her logic, we have to look at how she views human agency. She believes that the vital difference between her situation a month ago and their situation now is information. She writes that those other towns have time and warning given them to see the evil and shun it.
Ah, Okay, so it's about having the data.
Yes. For Abigail, fear is an acceptable biological response to the unknown. When the British suddenly occupied Boston, the colonists were caught off guard. But cowardice, what she calls pusillanimity, which is a fantastic, heavy word meaning a lack of courage or determination, cowardice, is failing to act when you have the data and the time to prepare.
So it's about inaction.
Exactly. She is saying, we suffered because we were the first. You have watched what happened here. If you get trapped now, it is not tragedy. It is a failure of preparation.
It strips away all excuses. You could be terrified, but you cannot be paralyzed. You have to take control of your fate. And it is exactly that feeling of empowerment, that brief window of gaieté de corps and temporary peace that seems to act as a launch pad for the most famous section of this letter. She pivots from enjoying the spring to literally demanding the philosophical foundation for a new society.
She seizes the intellectual momentum of the moment perfectly. She tells John, I long to hear that you have declared an independency. She wants the official legal break from the British Empire. And then she seamlessly transitions into laying out the terms of that new reality.
She writes, and by the way, in the new code of laws, which I suppose it will be necessary for you to make, I desire you would remember the ladies and be more generous and favorable to them than your ancestors. I love the framing of, and by the way,
It's very understated.
it's so casual yet so explosive. Hey, while you are literally inventing a new system of human governance from scratch down in Philadelphia, could you maybe just not hardwire systemic oppression into the framework?
It is brilliant, and she backs up this request with a fundamental truth about human nature. Utilizing the exact same political rhetoric that John and the Continental Congress are using against King George III.
Oh, that is clever.
She warns him not to put such unlimited power into the hands of husbands, reminding him, remember, all men would be tyrants if they could.
She is totally weaponizing his own revolutionary logic against him. The entire justification for the colonists fighting the British is that unchecked power inevitably, mechanically leads to tyranny. You cannot give a king absolute power because human nature will cause him to abuse it. And she is saying, okay, if that is true for kings, it is true for husbands.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, she is taking John Locke's theories of governance, which were the bedrock of the Revolution, and applying them radically to domestic marriage laws. The legal concept at the time was coverture, where a woman's legal rights and obligations were subsumed by those of her husband upon marriage.
She basically ceased to exist, legally speaking.
Precisely. She became a legal non-entity. Abigail is identifying coverture as a form of domestic tyranny, identical to the political tyranny they are fighting.
But I want to make something incredibly clear for you listening. This was not just a polite, gentle request for kindness. She isn't saying, please be nicer to us. She is issuing a literal, explicit threat of a political strike.
A very explicit threat.
Listen to this language. If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation.
It is a stunning foundational declaration. No taxation without representation was the core rallying cry of the colonies. She echoes that mechanism perfectly, saying no submission to laws without voice or representation. She is drawing a flawless, unbreakable parallel between the political subjugation of the American colonies by the British Parliament and the legal subjugation of women by men.
Just put yourself in John Adams' shoes for a second. You are sitting in Philadelphia, stressed out of your mind trying to build a nation. Your wife is hundreds of miles away, single-handedly managing your property in a recovering war zone. And she sends you a letter, casually informing you that if you don't write equal legal rights into the new Constitution, she and the women of the colonies are going to foment a rebellion against you.
And she anchors this threat in a highly sophisticated philosophical argument about the mechanics of power in human relationships. She writes, that your sex are naturally tyrannical is a truth so thoroughly established as to admit of no dispute, but such of you as wish to be happy willingly give up the harsh title of master for the more tender and endearing one of friend.
I am fascinated by that dichotomy. Master versus friend. Why use those specific words? What is the mechanical difference in how those two relationships function?
It comes back to the concept of vassalage she mentioned in the very first paragraph. A master rules by force and coercion over a subordinate. A friend operates in a state of equality, mutual respect, and shared interest.
A partnership, basically.
Yes. She is arguing that a relationship built on absolute legal dominance cannot mechanically produce true happiness for either party. If men want a functional, happy society and domestic life, they must willingly surrender the legal title of master and elevate women to the status of friend.
But she knows you can't just trust people to be nice. right?
Yeah.
Which is why she pushes for actual structural legal reform. She asks, why then not put it out of the power of the vicious and the lawless to use us with cruelty and indignity with impunity?
Precisely. This is the core justification for a constitution. You do not write laws to constrain good people. You write laws to build guardrails against the bad ones. She acknowledges that men of sense in all ages abhor the customs that treat women only as vassals. But the law cannot rely on the arbitrary goodwill of sensible men. It must actively prevent the vicious and lawless from exercising cruelty with impunity.
There's that word again, vassals. She used it to describe the subjugated commoners in Virginia being crushed by the gentry, and now she is using it to describe the legal status of women being crushed by coverture. The thematic consistency in this one letter is mind-blowing. She is constantly tracking who has power, how it is abused, and how it must be restrained.
She concludes this masterpiece of an argument by redefining the proper role of government and of men in this new society through a religious framework. She tells him to regard women as beings placed by providence under their protection. And she urges men, in imitation of the supreme being, to make use of that power only for happiness.
It is brilliant framing. She is telling the founders, if you're going to hoard all the legal power, then you must imitate the supreme being. And God uses power to generate happiness, not to inflict cruelty without consequence. If you act like a tyrant in your own home, you aren't just failing politically, you're failing morally and religiously.
It is a masterclass in synthesis. She seamlessly blends Enlightenment political theory, raw emotional appeal, religion duty, and a highly credible threat of civil disobedience into a single, devastating argument for systemic legal reform.
It truly is. But just as you are soaring on these high ideals of independence, equality, and the divine right to happiness, the letter suddenly hits a wall. The entry stops on March 31st. And when she picks the quill back up on April 5th, the entire tone of the letter is shattered into a million pieces.
The transition is abrupt, and it is a brutal reminder of the era. She writes, April 5. Not having an opportunity of sending this, I shall add a few lines more, though not with a heart so gay.
Though not with a heart so gay. That bubbling gaiety decor from just 5 days ago, it is completely gone. Evaporated. And the reason why is just absolutely devastating. She writes that she has been attending the sick chamber of their neighbor, Trot, whose affliction she says she most sensibly feel but cannot describe, striped of 2 lovely children in 1 week.
The speed of the tragedy is the most terrifying part. She details it with grim precision, saying Gorge the eldest died on Wednesday and Billy the youngest on Friday with the canker fever. She notes it is a terrible disorder, so much like the throat distemper that it differs but little from it.
So what does this all mean mechanically? What is canker fever or throat distemper, and why is it killing so fast? For you listening, we need to understand the physical horror of what is happening in her neighborhood right now.
Medically speaking, throat distemper and canker fever in the 18th century often referred to highly lethal outbreaks of diphtheria or severe streptococcal infections.
Such brutal illnesses.
The mechanism of the disease is horrifying. It causes a thick gray coating, a pseudomembrane, to build up in the throat or nose. It swells the airways, making it increasingly difficult to swallow or breathe. Ultimately, if the fever or the toxins don't kill the patient, they asphyxiate. It spreads rapidly through respiratory droplets, making tightly packed households incredibly vulnerable.
It is an absolute nightmare. A child gets a sore throat on Monday, and by Friday, 2 of them are dead. I want you to just imagine the emotional whiplash of this. Imagine trying to write a manifesto for universal human rights, debating the theories of John Locke, and then having to put your pen down to go next door and watch 2 little boys suffocate to death in their beds, striped of 2 lovely children in 1 week.
This sudden, brutal shift perfectly contextualizes her earlier fear of smallpox. In our modern vaccinated era, we can sometimes forget the sheer omnipresent terror of disease in 1776. Disease was a mechanism of death just as efficient, just as capricious, and just as destructive as any British cannon. It could annihilate a family lineage in a matter of hours.
And the panic in the letter is rising because the sickness is visibly spreading from house to house. She gives John a grim, real-time update. She notes that Bessie Cranch has been very bad but is on the recovery. But Becky Peck, she says, they do not expect will live out the day. It is a neighborhood death watch.
The vulnerability of the human body is overriding all her political theorizing. She adds that many grown persons are now sick with it in their street, and that it rages much in other towns. On top of that, the mumps are very frequent, and Isaac is currently confined with it. The sheer volume of biological threat surrounding her is suffocating.
You can feel her terror when she talks about her own family. She writes, "Our own little flock are yet well. My heart trembles with anxiety for them. God preserve them." It's that horrible feeling of holding your breath, watching a disaster sweep through your neighbor's houses and just praying the wind doesn't blow it toward yours.
And the tragedy isn't contained just to her neighbors. She notes at the very end of the letter that her brother's youngest child, identified in the footnotes as Susanna, Peter Boylston Adams' daughter, lies bad with convulsion fits. The historical record tragically confirms that she died later that same month.
It is incredibly heavy. Her belief in human agency and preparation, the idea that you can shun the evil if you have time and warning, is put to the ultimate test. When you face an enemy, you cannot out-prepare. You can run from the British fleet, but you cannot run from canker fever.
This raises an important question, though. How does one cope with such suffocating anxiety? When the macro world is engulfed in a geopolitical war and the micro world is being ravaged by an unstoppable biological plague, how do you keep your mind from shattering?
By staying frantically, hyperproductively busy. She focuses with laser precision on what she can control. The way she concludes this letter is this surreal, almost absurd blend of mundane domestic chores and literal military manufacturing.
She responds to an inquiry John apparently made in a previous delayed letter. She writes, "You inquire of whether I'm making saltpeter. I have not yet attempted it, but after soap making believe I shall make the experiment."
Okay, let's unpack this to-do list because it is wild. Number one, make soap, which, given that there's a lethal plague sweeping the street, basic hygiene is a life or death priority. Number two, she mentions she is manufacturing clothing to keep her family from being naked. Basic, fundamental survival logistics. And number three, manufacture chemical compounds for military-grade explosives.
It is a staggering combination of responsibilities that completely erases the line between the home front and the war front. To understand the mechanics of what she is casually proposing to do, we need to look at what saltpeter is.
What exactly goes into making it?
Saltpeter, or potassium nitrate, is the critical oxidizing component of black powder. Without it, muskets and cannons do not fire. The Continental Army was desperately, critically short on munitions.
So the Continental Congress essentially crowdsourced the production of high explosives to housewives.
Exactly. They published manuals asking households to synthesize saltpeter on their own properties.
Oh, wow.
And the chemical extraction process was disgusting and incredibly labor-intensive. It involved creating compost piles of organic waste, manure, and ashes, letting it decompose, pouring water through it to leach out the soluble nitrates, and then boiling that noxious liquid down in huge kettles until the potassium nitrate crystals formed.
So Abigail Adams is planning to boil manure and ash to extract explosive crystals right after she finishes making the soap and knitting the sweaters. It is almost comical if it weren't so deeply serious. She is acting as the ultimate decentralized defense contractor.
And she is tracking the regional production metrics, too, reporting data back to the central government. She notes that Mr. Tertius Bass has made nearly 100 weight of very good saltpeter. She reports that Mr. Reed of Weymouth has gone to the Andover mills, which she confirms are now at work. She's functioning as an intelligence node for the colonial supply chain.
And then she casually drops this final piece of intelligence at the end of the letter. She writes, "I have lately seen a small manuscript describing the proportions for the various sorts of powder fit for cannons, small arms, and pistols. If it would be of any service your way, I'll get it transcribed and send it to you."
The breadth of her competence is staggering. She finds a highly sensitive recipe book for varying grades of military explosives and just casually offers to transcribe it for the Continental Congress to assist the war effort.
It is phenomenal. I mean, in the span of a few days and a few sheets of paper, she has debated the sociological flaws of the Virginia gentry, exposed the hypocrisy of slavery, navigated property law in a war zone, drafted a foundational demand for women's equal rights, nursed the dying through a horrific plague, coordinated the regional production of munitions, and secured classified explosive schematics.
It truly is a document without equal. It captures the absolute totality of the human experience during a time of immense historical consequence. We see the soaring ideals of liberty and equality inextricably tangled with the visceral, brutal realities of disease, survival, and warfare.
It is an overwhelming amount to process. But before we wrap up today's deep dive, we like to isolate a specific moment that really captures the essence of what we've been exploring. For today's clip of the day, we have to highlight the breakdown of the Remember the Ladies section. Specifically, the explicit mechanical threat she levels at the Founding Fathers, when she says, "If particular care and attention is not paid to the ladies, we are determined to foment a rebellion, and will not hold ourselves bound by any laws in which we have no voice or representation." That right there is the pure, unfiltered spirit of the revolution, turned inward to demand justice at home.
It is a powerful reminder that the struggle for equality is foundational, and it was being articulated with immense clarity, using the exact same philosophical tools as the revolution itself from the very beginning.
Absolutely. Now, before we let you go, a quick reminder. News and Guidance is a value-for-value program. If you get something out of these episodes, check out smallbatchsteve.com for ways to support our work and try some. This seasoning, it is garlic and onion free and will make you say, ooh, W-E.
We want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've seen exactly what Abigail Adams and the women of her community were managing. They were surviving devastating plagues, managing complex properties in active war zones, debating nuanced political philosophy, running intelligence networks, and literally figuring out how to manufacture gunpowder from scratch in their backyards.
So, knowing all of that, knowing exactly how capable, resilient, and fiercely intelligent these women were, why didn't the man at the Continental Congress take the threat of that women's rebellion a little more seriously? It's something to chew on.
Adios, folks.
Adios, folks.